Beneath the hallowed stones of America's most famous cathedral lies a secret that was never meant to be found. When restoration workers accidentally break through an ancient seal under St. Patrick's Cathedral's main altar, they uncover a perfectly preserved body with lips sewn shut by golden thread, and a warning carved in Aramaic that has remained hidden for centuries. Forensic archaeologist Mateo Rojas is summoned to investigate, but as he delves deeper into the mystery, workers begin disappearing, their minds fractured by what they've seen. Something has been awakened, not a supernatural force, but an idea so dangerous it was deliberately fragmented across 4 continents and buried beneath humanity's holiest sites. An idea that changes anyone who truly comprehends it. What connects Tesla's forgotten research to ancient temples aligned along fault lines? Why are government agencies erasing evidence of what Mateo discovers? As the cathedral's visitors grow strangely silent and manuscript pages rewrite themselves overnight, Mateo and archivist Emilia Vescovi race to understand what lies beneath before they lose their minds, or worse, before they understand completely. The hammer's impact against stone echoed through the crypt like a scream torn from ancient lungs. 2 more strikes, and the irregular slab beneath St. Patrick's Cathedral's main altar cracked, a sound that didn't belong in this sacred silence. The restoration team froze as fine dust billowed upward, catching the harsh work lights in spectral patterns. "Stop," whispered Miguel, the lead mason, his weathered face paling beneath his hard hat. "Something's wrong." The dust didn't settle as expected. It hung suspended, almost magnetic, around the newly formed fissure. Miguel knelt closer, squinting at the darkness beyond the crack. His phone, set to record the day's progress for documentation, captured what happened next. The slab didn't just break, it collapsed inward, revealing not solid earth but a perfectly formed chamber beneath. As Miguel steadied himself against the sudden void, the stale air that rushed upward carried a scent that wasn't decay or must, but something sharper, metallic and wrong, like the taste of blood. "Jesus Christ," breathed Trevor, the structural engineer, as their lights illuminated what lay below. A body, perfectly preserved. Not a skeleton, but a mummified figure, with skin like tanned leather stretched across sharp cheekbones. Its hands were crossed at the chest, not in peaceful repose, but bound with ornate copper wire that had turned green with age. Most disturbing was the face, mouth sewn shut with threads that glinted gold under their flashlights, the stitches forming a pattern too deliberate to be mere closure of the lips. The figure wore fragments of ecclesiastical garments, but of a style no one recognized. Miguel's phone slipped from his grip, tumbling into the chamber. It landed beside the body, its camera still recording, light aimed upward to capture their expressions of horror from below, as if the dead were watching the living discover its secret. "Nobody touches anything," Trevor ordered, backing away. "This is way above our pay grade." But it was too late. The clip was already moving through the workers' phones before Trevor could enforce a blackout. Within the hour, 4 men in dark suits and clerical collars descended into the crypt. They confiscated devices, took statements, and sealed the chamber with industrial tarps that seemed prepared for exactly this purpose. As they worked, the youngest technician noticed something that the others missed. Beneath centuries of dust, Aramaic characters had been carved into the chamber's inner wall. They seemed to shimmer when viewed from certain angles, an optical illusion from ancient craftsmen who understood how light would enter this space. A rough translation, whispered from one worker to another, "He who deciphers shall cease to believe." By morning, Trevor was found wandering Central Park in his underwear, unable to recall his own name. The official statement cited toxic fumes from the restoration chemicals. He never returned to work. He never returned anywhere. 3 days later, Mateo Rojas stood before the cardinal's desk in the rectory office, a manila envelope thick with credentials in his hands. At 42, the forensic archaeologist carried his expertise with a quiet confidence that had opened doors at excavation sites from Jerusalem to Teotihuacan. His reputation for discretion with politically sensitive finds made him both valuable and expendable, the perfect combination for what the archdiocese was calling an assessment. The restoration project has uncovered some artifacts, the Cardinal explained, choosing each word with diplomatic precision. Given your background with Semitic inscriptions, we believe you're uniquely qualified to authenticate what we've found. Matteo noted what remained unsaid. No mention of the body, no reference to the viral video that the church had managed to scrub from most platforms, but still circulated in dark corners of the internet. No explanation for why local universities hadn't been contacted instead. You understand this requires absolute confidentiality, the Cardinal continued. The historical importance of St. Patrick's Cathedral to this city means any findings must be handled with appropriate context. Translation: Tell us what we want to hear. Matteo nodded. I'll need full access to the site, alone. The request was granted too easily. Warning bells rang in Matteo's mind. That evening, Matteo descended into the crypt, accompanied by a silent priest who unlocked 3 separate gates before leaving him at the final door. I'll wait upstairs, the priest murmured, making a sign of the cross that seemed directed more at himself than at Matteo. The crypt air hit him like a physical presence, not the expected dank mustiness of underground spaces, but something elemental and wrong. It smelled of stone that had never been meant to see light, of secrets preserved in darkness. The work lights had been removed. Matteo relied on his own equipment, which cast harsh shadows across the exposed chamber. He methodically documented everything: the precision of the chamber's construction, the body's positioning, the inscriptions. The architectural anomaly was striking. This space had been deliberately created during the cathedral's construction, then sealed and forgotten, or hidden. The floor surrounding the chamber bore strange markings, long serpentine grooves that radiated outward, not tool marks from construction. They looked as though something had dragged itself away from the tomb, scoring the stone with impossible force. As Matteo photographed the Aramaic text, he felt a subtle vibration through his boots. He paused, holding his breath. There it was again, not the rumble of subway trains, but something arrhythmic and directional, coming from beneath the body. He leaned closer to the mummy, studying the gold threads that sealed its lips. They formed a pattern that matched fragments of the wall inscriptions, a language within a language. His recorder captured the soft sound that escaped his own lips. What were they trying to keep in? Or out? A whisper, so faint it might have been imagination, seemed to answer him, rising from the chamber like heat distortion. Matteo stepped back sharply, his heart hammering against his ribs. Scientific detachment warred with primal fear. He forced himself to continue working, but his hands trembled slightly as he packed his equipment 3 hours later. The cathedral's main sanctuary remained open to visitors, its soaring Gothic arches and stained glass windows belying the secret beneath its altar. Morning Mass proceeded with practiced ceremony, the priest's Latin echoing through the vaulted space as tourists snapped photos from the periphery. Among them moved Emilia Vescovi, her researcher's badge from the New York Historical Society hanging around her neck. At 29, the Italian archivist's sharp eyes missed little, especially the unusual security presence near the velvet rope blocking access to the altar area. She'd been investigating an anomaly in the cathedral's foundation records when restoration work had been abruptly halted with no explanation. Emilia noticed him immediately, the man who moved with purpose rather than reverence, who studied the architecture with a professional eye. Their paths converged near the Lady Chapel, where Matteo was examining a section of wall that aligned with the crypt below. "You're not with the regular restoration team," she observed quietly, nodding toward his temporary badge. "Just consulting," Matteo replied, guarded but curious about her interest. "On what exactly?" Her Italian accent lilted the question. "Because I've found some interesting gaps in this building's history, years with no documentation, and the original site maps show something was here before the cathedral, something unidentified." Their conversation was interrupted by a cathedral security guard, but not before Emilia slipped Matteo her card. "The archives have more answers than they're sharing with either of us." That night, Matteo returned to the crypt alone, having memorized the security patterns. He needed one more look at the inscriptions without supervision, but when his light fell across the chamber wall, he froze. The Aramaic text had changed. The characters were the same, but their arrangement had shifted, forming new words. He checked his photos from earlier. No mistake. The wall now read, "It is not the past that fears revelation. It is the present." As Matteo stared at the impossible transformation, the whisper returned, closer now, almost at his ear. This time he was certain it wasn't his imagination. Morning light sliced through the high windows of the archdiocesan archives, cutting across rows of acid-free boxes like surgical incisions. Matteo and Emilia hunched over a worn wooden table in the restricted section, having gained access through a combination of Emilia's credentials and Matteo's newfound authority as a special consultant. Their fingers wore cotton gloves, stained yellow from handling documents that hadn't seen daylight in decades. "Here," Emilia whispered, pushing a fragile parchment toward him. "This shouldn't exist." The document, bound in cracked leather with a faded label reading Obadiah 2, was written in Babylonian Aramaic, a dialect that hadn't been widely used since the fall of Jerusalem. What made it impossible was its cataloguing date, 1827, years before St. Patrick's Cathedral's construction had even begun. "This was never canonized," Matteo said, frowning as he translated passages describing prophetic visions. "Not by any recognized biblical authority." His finger traced a line that made his blood run cold. "A pillar buried in the city of modern empires." Another passage referred to a gospel that blinds the eyes of men. When he compared these fragments to his photographs of the crypt symbols, the correspondence was unmistakable. "It's not just similar," Emilia said, her voice tightening. "It's literal, as if whoever wrote this had seen what's under the cathedral before it was even built." They worked in silence for hours, the weight of what they were uncovering pressing down like the stone above the crypt. The document described 4 anchors placed at coordinates that made no sense until Emilia plotted them on a modern map. Malta, Ethiopia, southern France. "And here," she said, tapping New York. "All sites with significant religious architecture built over older foundations." Matteo's phone vibrated, a text from an unknown number. "Museum of City Art, Sub-Basement Storage, Accession, J, 1873. Nothing else. 2 hours later, they stood before a climate-controlled cabinet in the museum's archaeological holdings, where a curator reluctantly retrieved a small Sumerian artifact not listed in any public catalogue. The clay tablet, no larger than Matteo's palm, bore markings identical to sections of the crypt inscription. "This shouldn't be here," the curator said nervously. "Sumerian artifacts from this period never made it to North America." "When was it acquired?" Emilia asked. "That's the problem." The curator pointed to the acquisition date, 1899, but carbon dating puts it at both 4,500 years old and, impossibly, less than 200 years old. "We've run the tests repeatedly. It's as if it existed in 2 time periods simultaneously." The curator stepped away to answer a call, and Emilia quickly photographed the piece from multiple angles. "These records have been tampered with," she whispered. "Look at the digital cataloging inconsistencies. Someone's been altering the metadata." Outside Manhattan's evening rush hour swallowed them as they debated what they'd found. Matteo hadn't slept properly since his second visit to the crypt. In his dreams, he saw submerged chambers, heard voices muffled by stone, watched a cross rotate like a combination lock. "It's changing us," he admitted, rubbing his eyes. "I'm starting to see patterns everywhere, alignments between ancient structures and magnetic field lines, global patterns that can't be coincidence." "You need sleep," Emilia said, but her own face showed the strain of their discoveries. They parted ways near Washington Square Park. Matteo took the subway uptown to his borrowed faculty apartment. He was fumbling with his keys when he noticed the man waiting in the shadows of his doorway, elderly, wearing a clerical collar, his face lined with an expression that mingled fear and resignation. "Father Karras," the man introduced himself. "I was the last curator of the crypts before they removed me, without explanation." His gnarled fingers trembled as he pressed a worn map into Matteo's hands. "There are 4 pillars. The one beneath St. Patrick's was the last to be activated." The map was marked with symbols identical to Templar ruins in Ethiopia, Malta, and southern France. Before Matteo could ask what activated meant, the old priest backed away. "Find the connection before they silence us all," Karras whispered, his eyes darting to the street where a black sedan had slowed. "They're watching you now, too." The next morning, police pulled Father Karras's body from the Hudson River. The medical examiner would note two anomalies: no water in the lungs, indicating he was dead before entering the river, and surgical precision in the removal of both eyes. Matteo's apartment felt like a stranger's home. Newspaper clippings, printouts, and photographs plastered the walls, a physical manifestation of his fragmenting mental state. Father Karras's death had been ruled suicide despite the missing eyes. The official police statement mentioned self-harm during a psychotic episode, ignoring the impossibility of the trauma pattern. His phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number containing only an audio file. Matteo hesitated before playing it, remembering Karras's warning. The sender identified himself as Dominic, a restoration technician who'd been there when the crypt was opened. "I installed ultra-low-frequency microphones before they kicked us out," the technician's voice explained. "Standard procedure for structural assessment, but what they picked up, it's not structural." Matteo transferred the file to his laptop and opened audio analysis software. The recording contained nothing but background static at first listen. But when he ran it through frequency isolation filters, a pattern emerged: rhythmic disturbances occurring precisely every 3,133 milliseconds. "Not random," Matteo muttered, fingers flying across the keyboard. He synchronized the audio with thermal imaging photos of the chamber wall. When the rhythm peaked, invisible sections of the inscription flared on the thermal spectrum, hidden text revealed only through sound patterns. The newly visible inscriptions contained fragments of an unknown gospel, suggesting that truth had been divided into 4 languages to prevent its complete understanding. His phone rang. "Emilia." "I need to see you," she said, her voice tight with controlled urgency. "The Morgan Library now." 90 minutes later, they sat in the rare manuscript room, a leather-bound volume between them. The curator had granted them access reluctantly, noting the manuscript's fragile condition. "Giordano Bruno," Emilia whispered, turning pages with gloved hands. "Burned at the stake for heresy in 1600. The document contained Bruno's speculations about what he called the stone word, a text that would only reveal itself to the right ear at the right time. Bruno hypothesized connections between sound frequencies, human perception, and hidden knowledge. He was theorizing acoustic physics centuries before modern science, Matteo said, increasingly agitated. "This connects everything, resonance patterns, geodesic alignments." "You're not sleeping," Emilia observed, noting the dark hollows beneath his eyes. "I can't stop seeing it," he admitted. Ancient temples built along magnetic lines, sacred sites positioned at precise geographic coordinates. It's like they were following some global pattern we've forgotten how to see. Or chosen not to, Emilia countered. What if these pillars are warning markers, not celebrations? Tension crackled between them. Emilia had maintained professional detachment, while Matteo increasingly resembled the obsessives he'd once dismissed in his field. The rational archaeologist was giving way to something else, someone who saw connections everywhere, necessary or not. That evening, Emilia discovered something that fractured their tenuous trust. The thermal patterns from the crypt had appeared before, in a CIA document dated 1952, labeled Ultra-Secret Project Elux. She'd found it in a declassified archive, but when she tried to download it, the file vanished from the server. When she returned to the search page, no record of the document remained. She called Matteo immediately, but her words were met with silence on the other end. "Matteo, someone's been in my apartment," he finally said, voice hollow. "Nothing taken, but there's ash on the floor, arranged in a perfect circle, and in the center," his breath caught, "a stone replica of the inscription. Emilia, it wasn't here 20 minutes ago when I stepped out. Don't touch anything," she instructed. "I'm coming over." "No," he said sharply. "Stay where you are. They're watching both of us now." "Who is they?" she demanded. The line went silent for several seconds before Matteo answered, his voice suddenly calm in a way that frightened her more than his panic. "I don't think that's the right question anymore," he said quietly. "The real question is, what activated when we opened that chamber, and why can I hear it even when I'm not in the crypt?" A faded historical marker on the corner of West Village's Jane Street was easy to miss among the boutiques and brownstones. "Former laboratory of Nikola Tesla, 1899 to 1901, it read, the bronze dulled by decades of city grime. Matteo stood before the unremarkable building that now housed luxury apartments, clutching a photocopy of correspondence between Tesla and an Irish priest who had lived at St. Patrick's Cathedral during the inventor's New York period. The building superintendent was unimpressed by Matteo's academic credentials, but softened at the sight of cash. "Basement's been sealed since the 40s, he said, pocketing the bills. "Asbestos or something, nobody goes down there." The ancient service elevator groaned beneath them as they descended below street level. The superintendent unlocked a rusted door, revealing a space that smelled of electrical decay and abandoned ambition. 20 minutes, he warned. "Then I'm coming back, whether you're done or not." The laboratory had been stripped of equipment long ago, but Tesla's presence lingered in the architectural details. Specialized wiring conduits and strange copper fittings protruding from the walls. Matteo pulled out his UV light and methodically swept the room, stopping when the floor revealed footprints, recent ones, leading to a particular section of wall. He pressed against the paneling until something clicked. A hidden compartment slid open, revealing a stack of drawings protected between copper plates. The diagrams depicted wave patterns and brain models, alongside annotations in Tesla's distinctive handwriting, sound frequencies modulating human perception, and cognitive entrainment via harmonic resonance. Most disturbing was a letter from Father Thomas Sullivan, dated November 1899. The sounds emanating from the stone confound the human mind. Prolonged exposure has rendered 3 acolytes unable to recognize their own reflections. I implore you to investigate whether this phenomenon bears scientific explanation, or if we face something beyond natural understanding. Tesla's reply was clipped. "What you describe violates no physical laws, only our limited understanding of them. Consciousness itself may be merely frequencies we have yet to measure properly." Matteo photographed everything with shaking hands before carefully returning the documents. His phone vibrated, Emilia calling from Malta. "The flight was diverted twice," she said without preamble. "Someone doesn't want me here." Emilia had traveled to Medina Cathedral, one of the locations marked on Father Karras's map. She'd used her academic credentials to gain access to restricted areas beneath the cathedral. "It's identical, Matteo," she said, her voice tight with controlled excitement. "The same structure we found in New York, but this one's been destroyed. Deliberately." "When?" "According to records, 1962, but the local guide told me something strange. He said, 'You're too late. The pillar has already been activated. Truth is now in motion.'" Matteo's skin prickled. "What else did you find?" "A symbol carved into stone. It resembles a modern circuit board, but carbon dating places it at over 600 years old." Her voice dropped. "I've hidden copies in 3 separate locations. I don't trust airport security anymore." Her instincts proved correct. At the Malta International Airport, plain-clothed agents intercepted her, confiscating her camera and research materials under the pretense of cultural heritage protection. When Matteo met her flight at JFK the following day, Emilia's face was drawn with exhaustion and simmering anger. "They knew exactly what to look for," she said, as they navigated the terminal. "But they missed this." She pulled a thumb drive from her hair, disguised as an ornamental pin. That night, in the relative safety of a 24-hour diner in Queens, they reviewed her findings alongside Tesla's documents. The connection was undeniable. Both described technologies for manipulating human perception through specific frequencies. "We need to finish decoding the message in the crypt," Matteo said, his coffee untouched, "before someone stops us permanently." "Like Karras?" Emilia asked quietly. Matteo didn't answer. The dark circles under his eyes had deepened. His normally meticulous appearance had given way to rumpled clothes and a 3-day stubble. He'd lost weight, his cheekbones now sharp beneath sallow skin. "What's happening to you?" she pressed. "I've translated the final inscription," he said, avoiding her question. "It speaks of a fracture in human perception, a universal programming error corrected with blindness." He ran his hands through his unkempt hair. "It makes no sense linguistically, but I understand it. The truth is blinding me, Amelia. Not physically, but emotionally." His fingers trembled slightly as he pushed a notebook toward her. Inside were pages of his normally precise handwriting, now reduced to fractured, desperate scrawls. "I don't know what's real anymore," he whispered, "and that might be exactly the point." St. Joseph's Chapel remained locked to the public most days, its small annex to the cathedral rarely visited even by the faithful. The security guard who intercepted Matteo at the narrow side entrance was expecting him, another disturbing indication that his movements were being tracked. "Cardinal's office arranged your access," the guard said flatly, unlocking the heavy wooden door. 1 hour, no equipment except handheld. Matteo stepped into the hushed space, waiting until the guard's footsteps faded, before retrieving his specialized light from an ankle holster. The chapel's 19th century reconstruction had incorporated elements salvaged from a medieval European monastery, most notably the elaborate mosaic that dominated the eastern wall. At first glance, the mosaic depicted a conventional sacred scene. But Matteo had noticed an anomaly in old photographs. Certain tiles reflected light differently when viewed from specific angles. He positioned himself at the precise spot where the morning light struck the surface obliquely and switched on his narrow-beam UV lamp. Hidden patterns emerged under the specialized light, a three-dimensional map with 4 vertices connected by lines that formed a perfect geometric pattern. New York's position marked the final point, labeled in microscopic Latin as Sigillum Romae, the seal of Rome. At the map's center lay a cross unlike any Christian symbol Matteo had seen, formed by angles that seemed to defy Euclidean geometry, as if broken across dimensions rather than space. He photographed the revelation with his phone, fingers trembling. The pattern matched coordinates from Carus's map, Tesla's frequency drawings, and the Sumerian artifacts' engravings. Everything converging on this impossible map, hidden in plain sight for over a century. The chapel door opened behind him. "Find anything worth dying for, Dr. Rojas?" The voice belonged to a thin man in an immaculate charcoal suit, his accent vaguely European, his smile coldly professional. "Just admiring the artistry," Matteo replied, pocketing his phone with forced casualness. "Indeed, the craftsmanship of our predecessors is illuminating." The man stepped closer. "My employers are concerned about your extracurricular activities with Ms. Vescovy. Academic curiosity is admirable, but some doors are sealed for reasons beyond historical preservation." "Who exactly are your employers?" Matteo asked, his mouth dry. The man's smile tightened. "Let's say they've been maintaining certain boundaries since long before this cathedral existed." He handed Matteo a business card, blank except for a phone number. "When you realize the implications of what you found, call this number, before you share your theories publicly." After the man left, Matteo examined the mosaic's frame with renewed intensity, discovering a Latin inscription hidden beneath. "Quod sustinet hominem etiam cadit." That which sustains man also falls. Emilia's apartment was surrounded by stacks of geological survey maps when Matteo arrived. Her laptop displayed seismic activity patterns across 4 continents. "The vertices on your mosaic map," she said without looking up. "They all sit on significant fault lines." "Fault lines?" Matteo leaned over her shoulder, processing the implication. "You're suggesting these pillars were positioned in relation to seismic activity." "Not just positioned, embedded within the most geologically unstable regions on their respective continents." Emilia pulled up a 3D model. What if these ancient structures weren't built to honor gods, but to contain something, to stabilize something? The idea crystallized between them, a connection between faith and geodynamics that was deeply unsettling. Matteo recalled the Obadiah text. "When the last seal breaks, what sustains man also collapses." "The catastrophe isn't divine," Emilia whispered. "It's psychological. a collapse of collective perception. That evening, Matteo found a press release on the Archdiocese website discreetly refuting spurious claims regarding archaeological discoveries beneath St. Patrick's Cathedral. The statement cited routine maintenance and dismissed conspiracy theories propagated on social media. Matteo printed the statement, his hands shaking with anger and something closer to fear. He was being erased, his findings discredited before he could even publish them. On his way to meet Emilia, he noticed two men following him from the subway platform at Fifth Avenue. They weren't attempting to hide their surveillance. He tried to lose them in the crowded station, but when he emerged on the street level, everything blurred. 6 hours later, he regained consciousness in Bryant Park, disoriented and missing his phone. His jacket pocket contained a page torn from a book he'd never seen before, with a single typewritten sentence, "Nothing is more lethal than truth spoken too soon." As Matteo stared at the message, something shifted inside him, a fracture in his perception that had been widening since the crypt. Something was breaking apart, perhaps reality itself, or maybe just his grip on it. The Carnegie Institute's concrete facade loomed grey against the morning sky as Emilia approached with Dr. Julian Ross, a cryptographer whose paranoia rivaled her own. He'd agreed to help after she'd mentioned the frequency patterns, his academic obsession for 20 years. "We need 10 minutes in their archives," Emilia explained. "They won't grant access to these files through official channels." Julian nodded, clutching his visitor badge. "My lecture starts in 30 minutes. Security will be focused on the main hall." They slipped through the labyrinthine corridors until they reached a restricted storage area. Julian's credentials got them through the first security checkpoint, but the final door required biometric access. "Wait," Julian whispered, producing a small device from his pocket. "Military-grade electromagnetic disruptor. Doesn't break anything, just confuses the system long enough to default to mechanical override." The lock clicked open, revealing rows of climate-controlled cabinets. Julian navigated directly to Section E7, removing a steel box labeled Eidolon Initiative, 1938-1943. "How did you know where to find this?" Emilia asked, suspicion creeping into her voice. "Because I've been looking for it my entire career," Julian replied grimly. "My grandfather was Dr. Elias Kaufmann's research assistant." The documents inside revealed a clandestine project that combined archaeology, neuroscience, and linguistics. Kaufmann's team had studied inscriptions from structures worldwide that exhibited what he termed cognitive disruptive resonance, symbols that altered the observer's belief structure upon viewing. His notes documented psychological breakdowns in researchers who had attempted full translations. Kaufmann believed these inscriptions weren't just text, Julian explained as they hurriedly photographed the files. "I thought they were neurologically active patterns that rewired human perception at a fundamental level." A map in the file marked 4 known pillar locations, identical to Karas's map, but included a 5th site in northern Brazil where an entire religious community had vanished in 1952. This location was marked as Origination Point. Emilia's hands trembled as she photographed the final pages. "What if the 4 pillars aren't the source but the containment?" she whispered. "What if they're meant to confine something worse?" Julian checked his watch. "We need to go now." As they slipped out, alarm bells began ringing throughout the building, not for them, but for a fire alarm triggered in the East Wing. Through the windows, Emilia saw people evacuating in orderly lines, while security personnel rushed toward the commotion. "Convenient timing," Julian remarked dryly. "Too convenient," Emilia replied. Matteo waited in Emilia's apartment, his gaunt face illuminated by laptop light as he reviewed the Kaufmann files. The 6 hours of his disappearance remained a complete blank in his memory, but the memory loss wasn't what frightened him most. It was the new clarity that had replaced it. "There's a 5th pillar," Emilia explained when she arrived, placing Kaufmann's map beside their other findings. "Possibly the original, the true stone gospel. Not a text, but a concept, an idea so primitive and impossible that the human mind isn't structured to process it." She pointed to Kaufmann's notes about protective blindness engineered throughout history. "What if our inability to perceive certain truths isn't a limitation, but a defense mechanism, a blindness built into human consciousness to protect us. Matteo shook his head, rejecting the abstraction. That's metaphysical speculation, not archaeology. Is it? Emilia challenged. What about the people who died after exposure to these texts? Karis's missing eyes? The psychological breakdowns? What if seeing the truth literally breaks human consciousness? Matteo stood abruptly. There's one way to find out. Before she could stop him, he disappeared into the bathroom with his laptop and locked the door. When Emilia pounded on the door 10 minutes later, he didn't respond. When he finally emerged, his face had changed, hollowed by something beyond physical exhaustion. He carried pages of writing, covered in symbols resembling the crypt inscriptions but in his own hand. I exposed myself to the same frequency pattern that activated the codes, he explained, his voice flat. 3.333 kilohertz, sustained for 17 minutes. He handed her one of the pages. The text seemed to shift as she tried to focus on it, as if the symbols were rearranging themselves beneath her gaze. The sensation made her dizzy, nauseous. She caught one phrase before dropping the page. The fracture exists in all minds. The correction is... She couldn't read further. Darkness closed in around her vision, and she collapsed onto the sofa. When she regained consciousness minutes later, Matteo sat motionless by the window, his silhouette sharp against the city lights. He was whispering something, over and over, in a voice that seemed to come from somewhere else. All will see. All will see. And for the first time since they'd begun this investigation, Emilia felt the cold certainty that the man before her might no longer be Matteo Rojas at all. Professor Adrian Caldwell adjusted his glasses nervously as the manuscript pages were laid before him in Columbia University's Secure Linguistics Lab. The university's linguistics department chair had been reluctant to analyze Matteo's writings without institutional approval, but Julian's academic standing and suggestion of a substantial department donation had overcome his hesitation. This is unlike anything I've encountered in 40 years of Mesopotamian language studies, Caldwell murmured, gloved fingers hovering over the pages without touching them. The structural elements resemble Proto-Sumerian, but the organizational patterns are impossible. 3 graduate students huddled around a digital scan, running comparative analysis algorithms. One looked up, her face pale. The text is mutable. Different algorithmic approaches yield completely different translations. That's statistically impossible, Caldwell said, leaning closer to their screen. We thought so too, she replied. But we've run it 17 times with consistent inconsistency. The text appears to reorganize itself according to the cognitive framework of the reader. A living gospel, Julian whispered, exchanging glances with Emilia. Caldwell removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. I need to attempt a direct translation of this section. The structural abnormalities are academically significant. I wouldn't advise, Emilia began, but Caldwell had already begun methodically working through the first paragraph, muttering linguistic markers under his breath. 20 minutes later, the professor sat motionless, eyes fixed on the middle distance, pupils dilated to black pools. His breathing had slowed to 4 breaths per minute. The graduate students backed away, one calling for medical assistance. His hand moved mechanically across a notepad, scratching a single word before he slumped sideways unconscious. Fracture. Emilia stared at the manuscript pages spread across her kitchen table. 3 days had passed since Caldwell's hospitalization. The medical diagnosis was unexplained neurological event, the 3rd such case connected to their investigation. She knew she should destroy the pages, but each time she approached them with matches or scissors, something stopped her. She'd begun noticing a pattern. Each line she managed to read triggered a memory she hadn't known she possessed. Fragmented images from childhood, conversations she couldn't possibly remember, sensations that belonged to someone else. The language wasn't just conveying information, it was accessing something deeper, as if the text itself recognized her. Her phone rang. Julian. They're monitoring my communications, he said without preamble, and yours too, most likely. We need to meet. The Botanical Gardens, 1 hour. The April rain fell in silver sheets, as Emilia waited beneath the conservatory dome. Julian arrived 20 minutes late, his normally immaculate appearance disheveled. "I've been cross-referencing Kaufman's notes with Tesla's frequency studies," he said, lowering his voice as a tour group passed. "The 4 pillars appear to maintain some kind of dampening field. The New York pillar was the last inactive node. Now that all 4 are active—" "Active how?" Emilia interrupted. "The vibration pattern Matteo detected. It's not random, it's a signal. The pillars are communicating with each other across continents through geological transmission." Emilia's hands trembled slightly as she processed the implication. "And the 5th pillar in Brazil?" "I believe it's the source," Julian said. "The original fracture point. The others were built to contain whatever started there." They agreed to meet again the following day, but Julian never arrived. His apartment was found empty, his research missing, and his computer wiped clean. When Emilia returned to St. Patrick's Cathedral 3 days later, she noticed something disturbing. The usual tourist chatter had been replaced by unnatural quiet. Visitors moved through the space with subdued expressions, as if the atmosphere itself had changed. Standing near the altar, she felt a vibration through her shoes, subtle but unmistakable, like the hum of distant machinery. She gained access to the crypt through a maintenance worker she'd bribed. The sealed chamber remained untouched, but the air around it seemed to compress against her eardrums. The pillar wasn't making any audible sound, yet she could feel it resonating, a frequency just beyond human perception that nonetheless affected everyone in the building. Returning to her apartment, she found Matteo waiting in the darkness. His frame had grown gaunt, cheekbones sharp beneath stretched skin. The pages of his manuscript had multiplied, covering the walls in patterns that made her vision blur. "I've understood what the fracture is," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. "Why certain knowledge must remain hidden, why seeing the full pattern breaks the mind." "Matteo, we need to destroy this," Emilia pleaded. "Whatever it's doing to you, it's not doing anything to me," he interrupted. "It's allowing me to see what was always there." He gestured to the manuscript pages. "This isn't a text, it's a key to perception itself." As he spoke, Emilia noticed something she'd missed before. His eyes reflected light differently now, as if the surface had changed its properties, like a stone that couldn't reflect properly anymore. 3 days passed without word from Matteo. His apartment stood empty, manuscript pages torn from the walls, computer missing. Emilia had gathered what remained of their research into a metal box, photographs, translations, frequency analyses. The weight of it felt disproportionate to its physical mass, as if the information itself added density. Rain lashed against her windows as she stared at the final translation fragment they'd decoded from the crypt inscription. "When all 4 pillars speak as one, the membrane thins." The phrase haunted her, not for what it said but for how it made her feel, a visceral unease beyond rational explanation. Her phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. "Greenwood Cemetery, Aldridge Mausoleum, midnight." The century-old cemetery sprawled over Brooklyn's highest ridge, its rolling hills dotted with Victorian monuments and weathered angels. Emilia navigated the winding paths by flashlight, rain soaking through her coat. The Aldridge Mausoleum stood isolated in the cemetery's oldest section, its neoclassical facade stained green with age. The mausoleum door hung slightly ajar. Inside, emergency lights illuminated equipment she recognized from university physics labs: oscilloscopes, spectrum analyzers, electromagnetic field detectors. In the center sat Matteo, cross-legged before a small stone box carved with the 4-vertex symbol. "You came," he said without looking up. His voice had changed, flatter, with peculiar emphasis on certain syllables. "What is this place?" Emilia asked, keeping distance between them. "The architects who designed St. Patrick's Cathedral are buried here," Matteo explained, his fingers tracing the box's edges. "They knew what they were building upon. This mausoleum sits directly above a natural convergence point in the bedrock, a node where vibrations travel with unusual clarity." The instruments around him displayed waveform patterns, matching those they'd recorded in the crypt. "The frequency is increasing," he continued. "All 4 pillars are in perfect synchronization now. Can you feel it?" Emilia could, a pressure behind her eyes, a sensation of temporal displacement, as if past and present were overlapping. "What's in the box, Matteo?" "A fragment from each pillar. Combined, they form a key." He finally looked up, his eyes reflecting nothing. The membrane between reality and the idea that the gospel wants to transmit is thinning. A thought impossible to conceptualize, a notion that dissolves consciousness itself. Emilia moved closer, her hand sliding into her pocket where she'd concealed a sedative syringe. "Let me see." "I wouldn't," Matteo warned quietly. "Not unless you're prepared to stop being who you are." Her training as a researcher warred with primal instinct. "This has to end," she said. "People are dying, Matteo. Caldwell may never recover. Julian is missing." They saw fragments, disconnected pieces. Matteo's expression softened momentarily. "That's what destroys the mind. Partial understanding. The complete pattern would transform rather than break." As he spoke, the instrument's readings spiked. The stone box began to emit a low hum that Emilia felt in her molars. "This is your last choice point," Matteo said. "See everything or preserve your current reality." In that moment, Emilia understood what he had become. Not possessed or insane, but fundamentally altered by information that human consciousness wasn't structured to process. The fracture wasn't in reality, but in perception itself. She made her decision. 6 weeks later, construction crews poured concrete over a section of Greenwood Cemetery's maintenance tunnels, sealing a small chamber that officially didn't exist. Emilia supervised the work personally, ensuring the location was disguised with a false marker. She had destroyed everything: the manuscripts, recordings, data files, all physical evidence of what they'd discovered. The official story, carefully constructed with help from academic contacts, dismissed the findings as misinterpreted archaeological anomalies without historical significance. Before deleting the final file, she wrote a single paragraph in her personal journal. "Truth is contagious, and we are not immune." In the months that followed, Emilia began losing her vision gradually. Specialists were baffled by the deterioration, finding no physical cause for her increasing blindness. But she understood. She had seen too much. The autumn sun filtered through St. Patrick's Cathedral's stained glass, casting colored light across the pews where Emilia sat, now legally blind, listening to a Sunday Mass. The rhythms of the ancient liturgy washed over her, comforting in their familiarity. She sensed someone sitting beside her, the slight shift in air currents, a faint scent of graphite. "Excuse me," a young man's voice whispered. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I'm an art student. I've been drawing this symbol all week. I saw it in a dream. I wondered if you know what it means." Though she couldn't see his sketch, Emilia knew exactly what it contained, the 4-vertex pattern, perfectly rendered. She turned slowly toward him and whispered, "Don't look at the stone." In the sanctuary above them, morning light streamed through the windows, illuminating every corner of the cathedral except one. The altar remained in shadow, as if the light itself curved around it, unwilling to touch what lay beneath.